Hi, you're watching India Post Live, India's first web TV news conversation online. I'm Shivraj, and today we're discussing the MH17 tragedy, what happened midair and what happens next. You too can join in on the conversation by logging on to indiapostlive.com. You can also tweet with us, use the hashtag IndiaPostLive or use the handle @IndiaPostLive. Right, it's been a few days since that very mysterious midair disappearance of the Malaysian aircraft in East Ukraine. Of course, now the United States is directly blaming Russia-backed rebels for shooting down that plane. Really, it's about victims of a conflict that they have nothing to do with. Let's take a look.
The controversy around the downing of the Malaysian airliner MH17 refuses to die down. The United States has made a case for Russian complicity, which saw all 298 people on board losing their lives. In a veiled attack at Russia, US claims that the plane was hit by surface-to-surface air missile fired from Russian-controlled region in Ukraine. Moscow has denied any involvement. Instead, it accused the Ukrainian military. President Vladimir Putin has called for a thorough probe into the matter, even as US threatens to impose sanctions on Russia. There seem to be no clear answers yet. Clearly, the myth that at 33,000 feet airlines are in their own ecosystem and safe has been shattered forever. But this incident has shifted the spotlight back to the mess in Ukraine.
And now the United Nations has passed a resolution without naming anyone, asking those in possession of the black boxes and the bodies to hand them over to international agencies. While joining us in studio to discuss that is Satinder Pandey from CAPA, who's a senior researcher there, and Atish Abe, who is also an international conflict expert as well. Until we find the black box, Satinder, I don't think whatever's been said so far can really be verified. It's all speculative, isn't it? Because it's absolutely unheard of that something like this could have happened.
It is true that it is speculative till we find the black box. But that said, the fact doesn't change that you have had an airliner which has just been shot out of the skies. So in terms of safety, there needs to be a strategic security review. Some airlines have, in fact, most airlines have already looked at their overflying routes. And you must keep in mind there are 5 ongoing conflicts. So you have Afghanistan, you have Ukraine, you have Syria, where there was a bombing at the airport a few hours ago. You have Iraq, and then you have the situation in Ukraine. So as far as aviation is concerned, very precarious. And that said, routes are being looked at and the international community is coming together. You just mentioned the UN resolution, so we are seeing that happen.
Okay, just hold that thought, because I think we're going to have to also come back to what the Europeans can do, because I believe that the monitoring agency is having a meeting this week. But I think it's a very complicated conflict, because unlike older conflicts where you had 2 sides you could identify, here it's a lot of cross-border support, and that of course it's become diplomatically very tricky because the United States has said something about Russian involvement. The Russians have taken umbrage to that, and it's becoming very difficult then to really resolve going down on ground and investigating the matter.
I think that's the primary focus of everybody right now, to first gain full access to that site. And having said that, there is a pattern, if you've seen the last say 20 years or so, this whole proxy conflicts that happen where non-state actors are involved, backed by states per se, and exactly. And I think the the strategic and diplomatic channel that is being used currently is to persuade Russia, to persuade those rebels to gain give access. The tricky part will be, can any action be taken against them? Because if not, then you're setting a very dangerous precedent that somebody can actually shoot down an aircraft.
And there are no repercussions.
There are no repercussions in any way. The US and the West is trying to impose tighter sanctions on Russia, but how far does that deter the rebels to carry out something like that? That will be the key in the coming days.
So coming back to the fact that what happens next, I think there are obviously clear steps that will take place. The European Monitoring Agency has said that it wants the black boxes in its possession. I think that will be crucial then to finding out what exactly happened in the last few minutes before the plane came down, and affixing blame as well.
Well, absolutely. But other than the blame, every time there's a tragedy, and a horrific tragedy at that in aviation, one of the steps we try and take as an industry is to ensure this never ever happens again. Which is why even after the black boxes are recovered, you'll have a lot of data. The international probe must be impartial. It must have multilateral agencies looking into it, so that we can ensure that something like that never happens again. Because geostrategically, that whole area, Ukraine, Afghanistan, that is on the flight paths for most flights to Europe. And within the aviation industry, fuel burn and flight times, these are two very critical parameters. They affect your schedules, they affect your cost. So yes, in the near term, they've looked at alternate routes, but in the longer term, this is an issue that would have to be addressed in a strategic manner.
So in international civil aviation law,
Yes.
has there been precedent or something like this? What are the recourse, or what are the ways of working around, of course, the tricky issue of, like Atishi said, the conflict on the zone, but actually addressing the real issues of what to do next?
Well, like Atish mentioned, this was unheard of. You have someone shooting an airline at flight level 340, which is 34,000 feet. And again, that kind of capability to shoot something that high up in the sky has never, at least in my knowledge, happened before.
So what are the repercussions for the civil aviation industry? I mean, unfortunately, Malaysian Airlines been a target of a tragedy in 4 months itself.
True.
Second time around.
So as far as the airline itself is concerned, you will see a decline in forward bookings. That is more of a behavioral response and impact of sentiment. Overall, we don't see any decline in the demand for air travel because that continues to be, regardless of the absolutely horrific incident that's happened, continues to be one of the safest modes of transport. And the desire to travel, especially from your Asian regions, continues to grow. So in the medium and long term, no impact to demand. Certainly an impact to costs, like I mentioned, in terms of fuel burn, alternate routings. And you might see airlines not flying to certain destinations. SpiceJet recently announced they're stopping flights to Kabul. So that is, again, each airline's internal assessment, and they'll take decisions necessary.
Okay, Atishi, like I said at the very outset, these are victims who have absolutely nothing to do with the conflict. Now we know that there are two sides arraigned against each other. It's very tricky and precarious because we don't know which way it would go, because Putin is clearly digging his heels in.
See, that's for sure. And what is also critical is how, at this point of time, Russia would, because if you just read the interview that the Russian ambassador gave to the Hindu just yesterday, he has refuted almost all the allegations against Russia. In fact, even saying that the audio that is being played out on YouTube, that's a fake one and was posted even before the aircraft crashed. So if this blame game keeps going on, probably you will not end up being anywhere, and you could see some cosmetic measures being given. But critically, what do countries do to protect their own citizens from something like this? And I think, as he said, the biggest thing is prevention and precaution, that you just do not allow airlines to fly. In fact, I'll just share a very small statistics with you with regard to this. Just in the last 4 days, over that zone, you had Aeroflot, you had Singapore Airlines, you had Lufthansa, you had Malaysian Airlines, and we are talking about 80 flights, 48 flights going over the same area. And also a no-fly zone was in place around that area, but that's only applicable up to 32,000 feet, not above that.
It's just not inconceivable that something like this
Exactly.
could have happened in 340.
I will add to that point, and this will be of interest to viewers. What we tend to forget is overflight is a source of significant revenue for countries. So nations granting overflight rights derive significant revenue. In case of Ukraine, very, very significant. I mean, in the hundreds of millions, the last figure I saw. So again, while there's also an interest for the nation to fix its internal situation so that those overflying rights are not lost out.
Okay, we're also just joined in the conversation by Sanjeev Singh, a senior journalist. Sanjeev, go ahead. We're discussing how it's totally inconceivable that a tragedy of this proportion could have taken place. What's your view? Okay, we seem to don't have it, but Atisha, you were making a point.
Yes, I mean, just coming back to the attack per se, one, you kept talking about the black box. Now, whatever I've been hearing so far from people, now they say that the black box itself is not so crucial to what comes out now, because if it was shot, the impact would have been so sudden that you would hardly have any conversations going on in the aircraft at that point of time. So the focus shifts back to what happened on the ground. And just to give you an idea, within June itself, these rebels have shot down 4 military aircrafts, including an IL-76. Now you know that that's a huge aircraft, and you can't go wrong with something like that. And those were shot with something that we call man pads, which is actually you mount the missile on the shoulder and you can hit it. Now this happened. Why they're speculating that it could be a surface-to-air missile? Because the Buk or the SAM that they talk about, that can hit up to 80,000 feet. To operate that kind of machinery,
You need expertise.
not just you need expertise, you wouldn't just suddenly say that, okay, I have an aircraft going, let me just shoot it. Because I just told you there were so many passenger aircrafts around, they didn't do anything with that. So they could identify that it was a passenger aircraft. Otherwise, I mean, and then they employed the SAM and then they shot. I mean, again, this is all talking about whatever is coming out of the reports. So I think we really need to be careful as to whether we can confirm whether it was the rebels who had shot, was it planned or was it a mistake, which nobody.
And it has international implications. We are joined online by Sanjeev Singh, a senior journalist. Sanjeev, what is your view on what happened on Thursday?
You see, I mean, the first thing right now is there's so much confusion. We don't know what exactly happened. There are allegations from both sides that, the plane was shot down either by Ukraine or by, the separatists fighting there. But the larger issue is that, as our panelists have been saying that, they've been at war for months. And we've seen, very little involvement from the part of the other countries to try and resolve this issue. I was just reading up and it says that the soldiers over there were saying that, you only come because there are foreigners dead. We've been at war for months. Why come now? Why only come when something like that happens? So, I mean, it's the larger issue because they were just letting it go. And, it's only when something like this happens that, the major countries wake up and, well, of course, there's talk of sanctions and all that. But is all that going to help? I mean, you really need to have some sort of intermediary force coming in to make sure that, such sort of instances do not happen.
Okay, so I think what Sanjeev is hinting at is somewhat of a humanitarian international effort to step into this conflict zone, because it is very murky. It has, I've been hearing some conspiracy theories that this is the impending Third World War, and all that sort of thing happening. It is right now very crucial that sense prevails.
Absolutely, and I think the first and foremost is to gain full access to the site. I mean, it's almost sickening to know that the rebels are using the bodies as a leverage to ask Ukraine to hold ceasefire and not allow, any more attacks. I mean, that's the kind of level of negotiations you're talking about. So as I think Sanjeev mentioned, that you really need a very strong intermediary who could step in and first allow full access, and then any political, diplomatic engagements that need to be happen, that's probably later on.
So given that it's a conflict zone, would an organization like the Red Cross or someone be ideal? Because obviously every party that tries to step in is deeply invested. The Russians have been very upset with the UN as well.
I think whosoever comes in, they need to be highly trusted. They definitely don't have to be a party to conflict, and they need to be seen as neutral. Now, whether it's an organization or it's a country that steps in, that will be crucial. And I think with the resolution of the Security Council, though it doesn't do much except declaring that access needs to be given, I think
it refused to name any party as yet.
which is fair enough, I think, because
given the current situation.
Absolutely, because if you name that, that's where you lose the neutrality. So I think as long as they can also identify either a person or a representative from a nation who can go in and negotiate that kind of an access, that will be the immediate, because families need closure at this point of time. Absolutely. More than anything else.
But Satinder, more than access, what happens from an aviation point of view in the next steps? You do, of course, step in, investigate, but what happens now vis-a-vis, because like you said, this is a heavily trafficked zone.
Yes.
and it's crucial for all those reasons that you cited, that, you know, fuel burn, routes that are more feasible. What can the international aviation community do to ensure that it separates itself from the parties and from those arraigned against each other in this area?
Sure. So we believe that international strategic security assessment is the need of the hour, and this needs to be done in a very timely manner, where you're not only looking at this conflict zone but the 4 others we mentioned, and an organization such as the ICAO or the IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association, or the International Civil Aeronautics Organization, coming in and declaring, if it comes to that, they have to be declared as no-fly zone in the interest of aviation safety. But a multilateral approach, and where all stakeholders are involved, we believe will be much better in terms of overall aviation safety, because, to repeat, this is a very, very heavily traveled zone, especially all your routes to Europe.
Absolutely, and the Russians have a lot to lose as well, Atish. So while this might be allegations of them backing these rebels with the expertise, they do have a lot to lose, because these are routes that are also dear to them, because it goes through their territory as well.
That plus the whole idea of, I was just reading somewhere that the Russian oligarchs, a lot of them who are close to Putin, they have now started, creating some bit of pressure, because the economic sanctions are directly affecting them, and it also and any sort of vulnerability in the airspace there affects business of the Russians in the continent. So I think it's if that kind of a pressure can be built up for Russia to act against the rebels, if it's proven that they were the ones behind it, I think that could be the most peaceful solution coming out of this.
But what about the very twisted notion that perhaps this is a way, and like what Sanjeev was alluding to getting international attention by doing something so outrageous?
But why would they need? There is enough international attention, and shooting down a passenger aircraft solves absolutely no strategic, is of no strategic value at all, because if you're targeting a particular country or a particular airliner, Malaysia doesn't figure anywhere in the conflict at all. The nationalities are, again, they're, an airline carries nationalities of all the people. So it serves no strategic purpose at all, unless and until it was an issue of mistaken identity where they were planning to take down.
So under international humanitarian law, what can take place as punitive damages or punitive measures against, say, a culprit they do find was behind this?
See, international law, again, more than punitive action, it definitely states what is not allowed. I don't know whether you can actually call it part of a war crime if it is proven that a state has backed this up. So I think I'll have to dig that up a little bit more. But international, I think aviation law definitely, civil aviation law definitely, I think has something to say about that.
So what does the international civil aviation law have to say in an untoward incident like this? Because apart from all the implications, there's also the issue of insurance and reinsurance and the expense of dealing with the entire crisis. Are there any clauses that actually imposes punitive damages on those responsible for acts like this?
I'm sure there are. I'm not an expert on aviation law, but that said, we've spoken a lot about punitive damages, but punitive damages can only be awarded once you know there's a party that's accountable. Mm-hmm. At this point, given the situation, it's very hard to even come to a single entity that you could possibly hold accountable, because, like Atisha mentioned, there's a blame game from both sides, and that's why the black boxes, they may not give us that kind of information, but it would certainly show you, where exactly the impact happened, and the location is very, very strategic.
And also remember, if it's a surface-to-air missile, it can be trapped through a satellite, so you would know if an SAM was fired, so where it came from and whether it was fired or not. And I think, just coming back on the international law, what it definitely states is that in a conflict, civilians and non-combatants cannot be attacked. Yeah. And it was clearly a civilian aircraft, though there are reports coming in that one of the pro-Russian rebel leaders, they said that
for a military aircraft.
No, not just a military aircraft. It was they even admit that it was a civilian aircraft carrying spies on board. there is, I mean, that's another theory that's going
So
around.
there are a lot of conspiracy theories. And lastly, Satinder, what do you make of the speculation in the media yesterday that, in fact, an Air India aircraft was just 25 kilometers away and tried to establish contact with the Malaysian airline pilot, given that ATC had asked it to because they had lost contact?
Well, firstly, I fly a little bit, not commercially, so that is very common where if the controller cannot reach the aircraft, he will ask someone else, only because they're closer and they feel the frequency might help, or they sometimes get a visual on the aircraft. 25 miles in the air is not a lot. You can visually see the airplane. But I have read all of the speculation. There are some sites like Flight Radar and some others where they actually show the position of the aircraft. So it could be likely. Again, I don't want to comment with certainty that did
so
happen.
I think until we actually have the black box and we have international access to the site and to the bodies, we won't really know, and I think all of this will be speculative. But thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us in studios and really trying to make something of this terrible, terrible tragedy. Thank you, and continue watching India Post Live and continue posting your comments on indiapostlive.com. Thanks for watching.